Noma, you may commence with the program.
Thank you, Pam. Good afternoon, everyone. Our facilitator and Vice Chair of UKZN Council, Dr. Maureen Tong, Chairman of the Chagos Refugee Group in Mauritius, Mr. Louis Olivier Bancourt, Director of the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Siphamandla Zondi, Leader of the Chagosians in Seychelles, Mr. Perry Prosper, author and former professor at the American University, Professor David Vine, members of Senate and staff, leaders from political, business, and religious sectors, captains of industries, distinguished alumni, students, media, members of media who are present. A special welcome to guests from universities and organizations across South Africa, the African continent, and the world. It is an honor to welcome you to this significant and timely discussion on human rights. Today, we are privileged to be in the presence of distinguished speakers whose work and lived experiences have shaped global conversations on justice, displacement, and the fundamental right to return. The theme of today's webinar, Deepening a Culture of Social Justice and the Right to Return, the Chagos Islands, South Africa, and Global Lessons for the Struggle for Human Rights. It reminds us that human rights are not merely ideals written in the charters, but they are struggles lived, fought for, and often denied. Just days ago, South Africa commemorated Human Rights Day, a moment for national reflection on how far we have come since the dark days of apartheid. Yet, even as we mark these strides, we are reminded that the fight for justice is far from over. Across the world, people continue to be dispossessed, marginalized, and also denied their fundamental freedoms. From the forced displacement of Chagosians to the many unresolved struggles on our own continent, we are confronted with a sobering truth. Human rights are never won once for all. They must be defended, reclaimed, and also deepened in every generation. That is why conversations like today matter. They force us to confront difficult histories, engage in critical dialogue, and most importantly, ask ourselves, what role do we play in advancing justice? How can we move from discussion to meaningful action? Today's speakers bring not just knowledge, but profound lived experiences. They have fought legal battles, documented injustices, and also stood on the front lines of advocacy. Their insights will challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of the agency of building a world where no one has to fight for rights that should be inherent. As we listen, reflect, and engage, I encourage each one of us to think beyond theory. Let this not be just another discussion, but a moment that strengthens our collective resolve to advance justice wherever we are. Thank you for being part of this vital conversation. I trust it will be enlightening and also thought-provoking exchange. I will now hand you over to our capable facilitator, Dr. Tong. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon from Pretoria, which is where I'm connecting from. It is a great pleasure indeed that the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where I am on council, but also my alma mater. I was a student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal previously, and it's really a great honor for me that the same university has seen it fit to raise one of the most important issues facing us right now, the issue of human rights. Not only human rights, but also the issues of the Chagos Islands. As a South African, I am in very deep awe and respect of my government for taking up the issue of Palestine, for litigating before the International Court of Justice, because indeed our foreign policy is one based on human rights and the respect for human rights as well. And I have seen part of the participants include several ambassadors, including Ambassador Welile Nhlapo, and it is really wonderful that he's here with us today. Today being a day on which we talk about social justice and the issue of the right of peoples to return, it is great indeed that, as Ms. Zondo has indicated, we are joined by persons that have had lived experiences on the fight for the right for human rights. It's a great honor that we have people from the Chagos Islands who were originally dispossessed and forcibly removed from their territory and from their homeland and displaced in Mauritius and Seychelles. As South Africans, we have deep understanding and appreciation of what forced removals are about, because as a people, we have indeed gone through that terrible, terrible legacy of forced removals, where vast numbers of people were removed from specific locations simply because their presence in specific locations did not fit into the mold of the government of the time that was based on segregation and a denial of human rights. And it is for this reason, therefore, that the issue of land rights is very deeply rooted in our constitution and in all the post-apartheid policies that have been put into place. And ironically and interestingly, this very interest in human rights and in land reform is one of the issues whereby the government of the United States has decided to issue an executive order against South Africa for daring to run its own affairs, specifically on the area of land reform. And of course, also for South Africa to choose to bring up the case of South Africa versus Israel for us to fight for the people of Palestine. Given our deep history with segregation, with abuses of land of rights to land, of racism, pure racism in South Africa, it is therefore not surprising that as a people would find the need to make a point of joining the struggle of the people of Palestine. As we do so, and hence we are meeting today, there is another people, the Chagos people, the people of the Chagos Island, that surprisingly for some, but not for some of us, in the year 2025, are still under colonial rule. And we are discussing as South Africans and as others around the world that are interested to say what it is that we can contribute to ensure that we make our own contribution. We help the Chagosian in their right to return to their homeland and their right to exercise self-determination. Today, we are joined with a very illustrious team, and thanks UKZN for making this possible. We have on our panel, and they'll each get a turn to speak. We have Mr. Olivier Banco from Mauritius. He's the chairman of the Chagos Refugees Group. He is a native, to use the parlance used by Chagosians. He's a native of the Chagos Island, born on the Chagos Island, and his family removed from the islands to currently live in Mauritius. He has brought a number of cases in the United Kingdom. One case also was litigated in America, and one case was litigated before the European Court of Human Rights. He will speak to us about his own lived experience and the struggle for the Chagosian, where we are and what Chagosians plan to do next. We will be joined by Professor Siphamandla Zondi, Director of the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. And I need to pause here and really acknowledge Professor Zondi for the fact that in the year 2022, his institute at the University of Johannesburg took up the baton and hosted the first International Chagos Conference on African soil that took place in October of the year 2022. So we are very grateful for the University of Johannesburg and for Professor Zondi for being interested, for writing as an academic, for being interested on the Chagos Island, and he will be one of the speakers. As you can see, participants, I'm not going through their CVs line by line. These are made available, their bios are made available in the invitation. We'll also have Mr. Pierre Prosper, he's the chair of the Chagosian Committee in the Seychelles Islands. He was born on Peros Banos in June in 1972 on the Chagos Island, and the family was moved to Seychelles. He has been keenly interested on this issue of the Chagos Islands and in Seychelles, mobilizing Chagosians living in Seychelles to say, what are we going to do about our right to return? What are we going to do about claiming our human rights and joining the struggle? We also have a dear friend, Professor David Vine, who I've known for several years, from the time he was completing his PhD on the Chagos Islands, and then proceeded to write several books, one of which, the very first was Island of Shame, The Secret History of the US Military Base on Diego Garcia. Professor Vine has been keenly interested on the topic and I've had the honor of speaking with him on the same platform at at least 2 or 3 conferences. And we look forward to hearing from him in terms of bringing forth a deep understanding from an academic perspective, but also having lived in Mauritius for some time as part of his PhD studies. So he's also lived in Mauritius and is very well known amongst the Chagosian and very respected. So ladies and gentlemen, this then is where we're at and where we are about to begin with our conversation. And I do understand and appreciate that for several participants, this will probably be for the very first time that they hear about the Chagos Islands, and to hear and understand why it is important for us to even speak about it as South Africans, and to understand what is required for us as a people who've also relied on international solidarity, that we do have a role to play to ensure that Chagosians as well have benefit of people who, like themselves, have experienced dispossession, have experienced forced removals, have experienced deep racism, and have experienced the inability to rule themselves. Without saying much, we'll then go straight into the program. And I'd like to introduce to have Mr. Olivier Bankobi, our very first speaker. He's joining us from Mauritius. He is the chairman of the Chagos Refugees Group. Olivier, may you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Professor Morinton. And I would like to thank the KwaZulu-Natal University and all the panelists and all those who are joining us. It's a great pleasure for me, on behalf of all my people in Mauritius, mainly my group, the Chagos Refugees Group. I myself, as Maureen said, I was born in Peros Banos in 1964. And at the age of 4, because of my sister who had been hurt by a Wilcott, when my mom go to the dispensary, the nurse told to my mom that she had to travel to Mauritius to have better treatment there. Why Mauritius? Because the only link which exists at that time was Mauritius, Chagos, and Chagos, Mauritius. Even Mauritius was under British colony, Chagos was dependency of Mauritius. And unfortunately, when I arrived in Mauritius in 1968, 3 months after my sister passed away. And when we decided, after the death of my sister, my parents decided to return because we left all our belongings in Peros Banos. When my mom go there, unfortunately, she had been said by the officer in charge that it would be impossible for us to return because the island had been given to America to build a US military base. And it's how our nightmare started. We were obliged to live in Mauritius, and we were not well prepared to live in Mauritius. We have to face this, and we have to meet with many difficulties, to adapt ourselves, to integrate in Mauritian society. But we were obliged to do it. And after that, there is a way that we did not have any communication as we used to have in the past. Everything had been cut until in 1965, the UK government decided on 8 November 1965 to create the British Indian Ocean Territory and to nominate a commissioner based in Seychelles. We as Sagosian are always asked for that, and I shall be very thankful to all the women, Sagosian women, who had lead the struggle. They started in Mauritius by making anger strike, demonstration, to let their voice heard. And this is how I myself have been involved in 1983, just after my secondary school. I have been encouraged by mom, being myself a Sagosian native. And I just want to know every time which prevents Sagosian to return. As the title is, if based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if you were born in a place, Article 9 said clearly that you have the right to live on your birthplace. I can't understand how Sagosian was expelled, had been dumped in the slum of Fort Louis and some of our brothers in Seychelles, without knowing what had been decided, who decides that, and where we have not been consulted to have any position on that. And what we did, as I said, the struggle started. I myself, in a way where one day my son was at the primary school, he came with me to show his Mauritius map to say, Dad, where were you born? I said, unfortunately, I was not born in Mauritius. I was born in Paris-Banos. He said, Dad, you need to bring us to Paris-Banos. There is interdiction for me, a prohibition for me not to allow to go to Chagos. Until we found out there is a British ordinance, 1971, who precludes the right of Sagosian to return to Chagos, even those who were born, except UK and US soldiers. At that time, I just started with all a legal procedure, as Maureen said, that we have been engaged into the legal battle to let know about our fundamental rights and our dignity. We started in 1996 with by challenging the British Ordinance 1971 to preclude Sagosian to return. And the case had been heard, and on the 3rd November 2000, there is a judgment, very historical, who had been given in our favor to say that what had been done to us is unlawful, and we consider us as belongers. Why consider us as belongers? Because the UK government said that we were contractual workers, and we should not forget that with all the documents that we have been able to find out, to have access in the public record office, we had find out how they treated us like Tarzan and Men on Friday, like Seagull. You see, all this become into public, and it was a time for us to let our voice be heard, and we continue with the struggle. We have been involved in many legal cases, as Maureen said, in UK, in US, in European Court of Human Rights. We even go with Mauritius to the International Court of Justice, and before to the General Assembly of United Nations. Because as you know, we as individuals, we did not have the right to go. We tried to write a letter to the Secretary General at the time, but we never accept as individuals. And this is why when Mauritius asked, let's go together, we went with Mauritius. Because why? If really the UK government shoulders the responsibility towards Sagosian, it will maybe never the question. And this is why we said, how could we believe, how could we put a hope in a country who ignore our rights? And this is why we have to go. And when we go, it's a way of us, it's a way for us to give, let our voice, let people know about our suffering. And we did it by the presence of Lisby Elise in the International Court of Justice. What Lisby Elise said, it's clearly that there is something wrong that had been done to Sagosian. Their way of treatment, their way of deportation, the way of taking decision without consulting the Sagosian, it was something unfair. And this is why when we explain, and I'm so thankful to all the African countries who have not only support Mauritius, but support Sagosian, because we are all African brothers and sisters. How could we ignore the place of birth of someone where you were born? You see, how could we ignore about our roots? This is why as I said, we are so thankful. Now, where we are, we have, for many years after the decision, advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, the matter had been referred to the United Nations General Assembly, where a resolution had been taken. The Prime Minister of Mauritius bring over a resolution to say that to stop the illegal occupation of the UK government upon the Chagos. At the same time, allowed Sagosian, those who want to return, to go and resettle on Chagos. For many years, the UK government denied, had never taken in consideration that, until in November 2022, they decided to open negotiation with Mauritius and to correct all the unsolved problems, including the problem of the former habitat of Chagos. And where to go? Because they are trying many ways of banishing our rights. Let me mention about the Oden Council in 2004. Let me mention about the Marine Protected Area where we didn't have any participation. Let me mention about the decision of making a feasibility studies in 2014, where they know even the report of the KPMG report was in our favor, said clearly that Sagosian have the right, there is no barrier to prevent Sagosian to return to Chagos. But unfortunately, the UK government have not go ahead to find a solution. They even come 1 year after with a support package to say that they will not allow Sagosian to return. They will improve the condition of living of Sagosian wherever they are. They decided a sum of 40 million pounds sterling, which have never been used, only less than 2 million have been used, and the exclusion of Sagosian to return to Chagos. Now, on the 3rd November or 3rd October last year, there is a deal. There is a decision between the UK government and Mauritian government, first of all, to recognize the right for those who want to resettle on Paros, Banos, and Solomon, and allowed to visit Diego Garcia. We do understand. We do understand because of the dates, it will be more difficult, but we never give up. We have to say it because if there is cohabitation on Diego Garcia, it should be available for Sagosian. Because Sagosian, if you have other people working there, why not Sagosian? It's a point that we all continue. And it mentioned about what can be done for reparation, because we have been suffering for many years. How could we ignore that? And now we have a deal. What to do? We do understand that we did not have 100%, but in all, we have something that we have been fighting for many years, the right to return to Paros, Banos, and Solomon instead of nothing. If there is any choice to do with that deal and other things, we have to choose. But we have only this. We have been suffering for more than 50 years. What to do? What to do? There is a solution. This is why we just ask. It's a way that where we as Sagosian, in Mauritius, in UK, in Seychelles, we are joining together to find a way to prepare our return to Paros, Banos, and Solomon, and to have reparation for all wrong, all injustice that we have done. As you know, we are now in a waiting where there is a decision. We have the blessing of the new elected president, Trump, who give his support to the deal, and we are hoping to have in the near future to finalize the decision of both UK and Mauritian government, and of course allow Sagosian to be able to return and of course to participate in the resettlement. Of course, it should be livable where people could have place to live. And of course, we should be among stakeholders. It's not a way of asking that decision will be taken on our head. No, it's never that. It's a question that we are Sagosian, we are concerned. We are based about how to can do when we talk about self-determination. We talk about self-determination in a way internal. We have a central government, but we have also Sagosian where can take decision about their future, to be involved as stakeholders elected democratically to be represented as Sagosian in Jegoga chapter of settlement. What we are looking for, instead of nothing, what to do. And we do respect some of our brothers and sisters want to continue to have a legal case against the UK government. It's their choice. But as we respect their choice, they also have to respect our choice, because let me share with you, the youngest Sagosian born in Chagos is now 52 years old. When he left Chagos in 1973, he was only 3 months. Now it's a man of 52 years. And the oldest Sagosian, in 2 months, if God bless, she will be 100. And most of us of old age, what is the wish of people? Is to be allowed, we have our parents buried there. Why not giving this opportunity? Why not giving this opportunity as a person before her death? The wish of my mom, let me share with you. Not only my mom, most of the Sagosian, they wish to see their birthplace before their death, but unfortunately, they have not accomplished it. The wish of the Sagosian to have reparation for all suffering. Why not finding a solution instead of nothing? If there is any choice to do, of course, we do it. There is many years that the UK government have to correct the injustice. What they say, they cannot return back the clock. What they say, they are deeply regret, but without doing anything to put an end to the suffering. Now we have two governments working together to find a solution, including the Sagosian people. Why not? This is my word to say it's a way where we need to be united. It's not a way of division. We do respect. It's not a way for me to encourage to go to settle in UK. I'm not against if their choice, but we should not forget about our origin. We should not forget about our roots. It's my word, and I thank you to give me this opportunity to share my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Olivier. Just as I was about to say, you have 2 minutes left. You wrapped up your presentation. I really appreciate the passion, and ladies and gentlemen, and the participants, you can understand how this issue is deeply personal to Mr. Banko, whose family was removed from the island, the land from where he was born, and until now has not been able to return since being removed at a very young age. So now, as we move, and I'm very pleased that Professor Zondi is with us. As I've said, the University of Johannesburg, in particular the Pan-African Institute for the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg, led by Professor Zondi, hosted in October 2022 the first International Chagos Conference on African Soil. And we are very pleased that he continues to be very keen on the topic, and he's joining us today as well to share his own thoughts, his scholarship, and whatever else he's like to show with us today. Professor Zondi, may I invite you to take the mic, please? And thank you, Olivier.
Greetings. Thank you very much. Apologies for battling with technology as I was chiming in. But thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Tom and the organizers. Thank you very much, the fellow panelists, for the opportunity to talk about the travails of the people of Chagos in the midst of changing geopolitics. And I want to focus on Africa. I want to talk a little bit about how the African continent collectively has been responding to the issue, and then comment on what this all means, and then comment on what that it means also for the processes going forward. I must just say that first explain my positionality. I speak from the perspective of decolonial thought and a commitment that the problems of this world, problems that generated by colonial patterns of development and governance require fundamental change, require fundamental rethinking of the space, rethinking of the knowledge, rethinking of identity, rethinking of the international relations itself. I come from a perspective that is committed to social justice, economic justice, ecological justice, especially for the people that are on the margins of society, that deserve to live a life that is fulfilling for them and that is just and is also fair, and that applies to the people of the KwaZulu archipelago, that they deserve their situation to be dealt with from a perspective of justice, fairness, and also liberation, which is them determining their own course and determining their own direction. It's an old perspective on the African continent that the fundamentals are important, the structures are important, the systems are important, and that the little progress that comes with specific decisions must be measured up against the systems, the systemic injustice that also needs to be atoned for. And therefore, reparational justice becomes an important one. Now, secondly, we hold the African continent to a higher ideal because the African continent promised higher ideals, right? From 1963, even before that, if you look at the Pan-African Congresses since the year 1900, have promised that we would have a comprehensive view to everything. We are looking for a comprehensive change, and that we are looking for a change that reaffirms the peoples of the continent's sovereignty, their sovereign right to equality and just outcomes. And the continent must be held to its ideals simply because the ideals are not real until they are translated into action and they are translated into experiences on the ground. And that applies to how we interpret the issue of the KwaZulu. In 1980, the Organization of African Unity took a resolution that made the issue of the Chagos Island very central and expressly central. And it was a resolution which became known as the Resolution on Decolonization. The June 1980 resolution proposed by the Council of Ministers, but then adopted by the 37th Ordinary Session in Freetown, Sierra Leone, it explicitly supported the cause for Mauritius' sovereignty over the Chagos archipelago. It reaffirmed the inalienable rights of Mauritius to the archipelago, including Diego Garcia, and it condemned very strongly the continued illegal occupation of these islands by foreign powers. And then there would be a number of resolutions that reaffirmed that position. Like then, 14 years later, in 1994, there was another one which was called a declaration on decolonization, because the 1981 was called a resolution of declaration. Now, declaration is a kind of a stronger term in African continental politics. It is a commitment that enjoins member states to act on what has been decided. Now, in June 1994, the OEU reiterated its stance and on the Chagos, and this was because the AU had to discuss the 30th anniversary of the declaration on the granting of independence to all colonial countries and peoples. That declaration had reached 30 years in 1994. Now, the OAU then went on to demand an immediate and unconditional return of the archipelago to Mauritius in compliance with international law and UN resolutions on decolonization. That would be a key one, because that marks the end of the OAU as an organization, but make sure that this issue is on the table. The African Union will not say much except echo all of this after 2002. Echo all of this until June 2017. In June 2017, the African Union decided to support wholeheartedly the UN General Assembly Resolution 71/292, which endorses Mauritius' request for an ICJ advisory opinion on the Chagos dispute. Of course, as you know, the UNGA voted overwhelmingly, 94 in favor against 15 that were against, and the 15 was mainly the US, the UK, and a few other vassal states, and all of that. Now, the African Union promised to stand firmly, with the Mauritius in seeking a peaceful and a lawful resolution to the decolonization of the Chagos. So that's what they call it. It's a decolonization of the Chagos. Now, when the ICJ released its advisory opinion in 2019, as you all know, then on the 25th of February, just after that, the African Union welcomed the decision and thought it was absolutely correct and thought it was overdue, and saw this as a victory for justice and rule of law in Africa, and went on to encourage the African Union member states to support this move and end the dominance of the US and UK over this issue. Then, in 2 years later, as you know, the matter comes before the UNGA for a resolution, and the resolution 116/6 demanded UK withdrawal from Chagos, and then indicated in 6 months. And the African Union took that up, trumpeted it, spoke about it everywhere, and made it a critical demand. So it urges all member states, it says, and the international community to accelerate the implementation of the resolution to complete the decolonization strangely, of Mauritius without delay. That's what it says. Then, lastly, in 2020, in February of 2020, the African Union returns to this issue again. Now it demanding the United Kingdom to comply with international rulings on this matter, and it demands a full handover of administration of the Chagos Island from the UK to Mauritius. And for the first time, it emphasizes the need to facilitate what it calls reparation of displaced Chagosians and their return on their land. And then it also, in a very interesting way, demands that the Chagosians' voices must be heard in this process of transition, that there are nothing about them without them. Now, at that point where I am, I note that the African Union approaches this from the perspective of state security, state sovereignty, and that is about Mauritius as a member state gaining access to this. Secondly, state security in the sense that it is only just about a land of the country of the Chakosian people becoming normalized and decolonized in the sense of being released from the British and American control. But the African Union does not read as strong as it should distinguish between Mauritius and Chagosians until the last declaration. It does not actually recognize, it does not actually fully realize that this has been the struggle of the Chagosians people themselves. It is them who have borne the brunt. It is them who have suffered. It is them who have been delayed. It's not them, it's their aspirations have been shattered. So it has cost them a lot what we are dealing with. Mauritius, yes, of course, but the Chagosian people themselves have paid a huge price for it. And it is them who are demanding that this must be done not without them, but with them, so that this does not resolve the injustice of UK control and US control and replaces with another injustice of further marginalization of the Chagosians, now under Mauritian sovereignty. So I think that's an issue that must be placed on the table, and that we place this. And I remember after our conference, we spoke to the governing party in South Africa. Even last year, when they had their conference 2 years ago, we forced it that they must have this issue in their resolution. So it's now in the resolutions of the governing party, so that it can translate into government policy that underpins reparation of justice, the right to return, and the right of the Chagosians to determine their own destiny and the direction things must happen. And lastly, to impose some form of penalty and some form of demand upon those who have delayed this issue and have therefore committed serious injustice on the people of the Chagos. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my dear brother, Professor Zondi, a brother I've worked with together at several institutions, including the University of South Africa, and with whom I hold in very high regard. And I really appreciate, Prof, that you've brought forward really historically, how the issue has been tabled and found audience at the level of the African Union. Ladies and gentlemen, let me acknowledge several participants in this meeting. I'm very glad to see that our chair of council of UKZN is here. I have seen also Dr. Sbongiseni, who's also served on the council of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I have seen several ANC international relations activists here as well. I have seen some of my former comrades. I was also in the student movement in UKZN. And I've seen several of them that are here, just including amongst them Dade Banda Mwelase, to mention him by name. I see friends. I see Mr. Malusi Mohali from DECO is present, and this is quite helpful. I'm very glad. DECO and the University of South Africa is working together on the G20 community engagement program. So it's beautiful to see that even at this level, we have representation. I'm rapidly going through the list to just please bear with me. I see Mr. Sean Kutsier, who serves with me on the board of Legal Aid South Africa. I see many friends who participate and join whenever I invite them, to take keen interest on these topics and have decided to join. Ladies and gentlemen, if I don't mention you by name, please, it's not for minimizing your participation. I'm just quickly going through the list as I see it. And yes, this I need to say, I see Mr. Kenneth Sihumelo, my house school teacher from Bantirstad, Homoso High School. It's very beautiful when your teacher from high school continues to take interest in the work that you do and participates in these very important conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from Professor Zondi, who's then given us a very fair and detailed explanation of the position of the AU on this matter from a decolonization perspective. And Prof. Zondi, on the last points that you've raised, that's where, as a human rights lawyer, and this is my position, and my entry into the Chagos Islands question and debate and writing a scholarship has always been from a position of human rights, on the right to return, on the right to reparations, as clearly established international law, and the right to self-determination. So I'm very glad, towards your closing remarks, when you are highlighting that the African Union has also started to recognize that, yes, at the level of states and governments, they can speak about Mauritius, but there are people called the Chagosians. These are the people who are the people of the Chagos Islands. And the entire struggle is what brought even the issue before the African Union itself, first the Organization of African Unity, and eventually the African Union. So, and that for me as a human rights lawyer, that's my focus, the right of the people. International law will be, the relationship between states and governments, but the right of the people. What of the people? As these governments are entering, deals, negotiations, agreements, what about the Chagosian? And for me, that's my interest. Thank you, Prof. Zondi. As we then move to Seychelles, we've heard from Olivier from Mauritius. We now move to Mr. Pierre Prosper, born also on Peros Banos in the islands, in the Chagos Islands, and moved as a child to Seychelles when the family was also removed. In South Africa, we know forced removals within the state of South Africa. Chagosians faced forced removals on a much higher level, removed from the entire country and the entire territory, which was their home, the Chagos Islands, and being sent to Mauritius and Seychelles. May I now hand over the mic to Mr. Pierre Prosper.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Maureen has just introduced me, I'm Pierre Prosper, and I'm going to be 53 years in June in the next few months, and I'm amongst the youngest that left the Chagos of the Peros Banos, where I was born. And my family was originally on Diego Garcia, and then they moved to Peros when people on Diego Garcia were being moved out because they didn't want to go. And then finally, I think September, October 73, they left and they came to Seychelles. My parents were originally from Seychelles, but me, I was born there. As an introduction to myself, I'm been interested in the Chagos. I started getting interested in the Chagos case from the stories of my parents as I was growing up. And before I went to university in the early 90s, I started joining the committees that were here and social gatherings that were happening in Seychelles. And then I went to university between 93 and 97 in Wales, in UK actually. And I did a degree in physics. Came back in 97, 98. I joined the group again, got very active. And then I went away again to work abroad for a period of time and came back in the 2008. And I got seriously engaged at that time and worked with the committee and a lot of activities that were happening locally. And in 2015, I decided that I need to take this one level up. And I was elected as the chairman of the group. And I also convinced the community that we need also to make sure, I mean, there's the group of natives here is quite significant, the people that were born there. And our interests historically were not always, our voice were a bit too quiet in terms of presentation of our community on the international scene, in the legal scene, in the diplomatic scene. So we decided that we need to take that up. We need to make sure that the community here in Seychelles are heard, are listened to. and to make sure that differences of what happened historically between the different communities doesn't happen to us again. So we actually got our own legal group, and we filed a case in 2015-16 in the UK. That was a case for support fund, and which, you know, in 2017 the UK government came back and offered the 40 million pounds. And we made sure also throughout all most panels that we had access to, and that the community here is known to exist, and that we participate fully in whatever policy decisions as and when we allowed, that we participate in the decision process. So that's a brief about me and how I got into this. The committee itself existed since in the early 90s. There was a whole 10 years before that things were happening in Mauritius that nothing really happened in Seychelles. When people were moved here, were evicted to Seychelles, and people were the political environment in Seychelles where, you know, no one should have any political opinion in those days. And people just, you know, spread themselves thin within the Seychelles community, the communities. And there were a lot of discrimination in Seychelles in those days against Chagosians. There were all sorts of names that people were called. And over the years, this have had a great impact. Even until now, a lot of people will not identify themselves as Chagosians in Seychelles. Though it's changed. It's changed a lot. So meaning I openly go and say and wear my flag on my back. But there's still a lot of people that, you know, are not scared, but ashamed, if I may use that word, to show themselves as being Chagosian. So that's something that our committee has tried very hard to work on. So when people were moved here, they spread thin within the communities here, and disappeared. And in the 90s, went through CRG and Olivier, when the cases in UK started up, we worked with Olivier and CRG and the parents, if I may say, of Olivier, the people that actually started these processes. We worked with them, we built up our listing, we participated fully in these cases in the UK. And I remember very clearly, I think in 2001, which Olivier mentioned, Judge Ousley that came out, Ousley or maybe some other judge, I'm not sure. And the judgment was that the decision for eviction was an abject legal failure. So that was a very, very strong judgment on our part, and that it should not have been done, and the right to return came back, or free offer, or whatever the term is. So, and that was a big win for us, and that, as far as we are concerned, was the basis of the direction of resolution from the British government towards us. The basis, the eviction was absolutely illegal and wrong, and we expected then that there would have been a positive path forward as to resolution towards the Chagosian community. But unfortunately, it didn't go that way for the next 40 years. It's been a constant struggle of diplomatic isolation, if I may use that word. A constant fight in all sort level of legal courts, both from the CRG group, from our group, from all of the groups, whatever group, and even on the diplomatic front, political front, we had a very, very, very strong uphill battle. And the British government's narrative is that they adopted from when Mauritius was still a colony and the Chagosians were being evicted, or when the Mauritius just got independence, and the position they took towards Chagosians as being men Fridays and lesser citizens. They maintained that throughout, all throughout until currently. For 50 years, nothing was done. And that narrative is still written somewhere in a book way back in the 80s or 70s. It's still there. The foreign office in UK is still somebody, every time there's a new administration, they pick up that book and read the same statement and they go by that line. There's no change. So this is where we are. Sorry, I get a little bit emotional when I go when I go. You go through that whole process again in your mind. So we decided that we needed to make sure that we participate fully in the story of how we go about in finding resolution. And so from there, from the fight, the legal fights, the diplomatic fights, the political fights, we've got the Seychelles government's participation in the past. We hope to work with the Seychelles government again now, and we've tried all form of strategy as far as the British government is concerned to find a middle ground, to find consensus for resolution towards our community. Nothing came back from them. And then finally, in late last year, British government decided to return sovereignty to the Mauritian government. And with honesty, the main reason being when Chagosians were originally moved to Mauritius way back, the Chagosians in Mauritius didn't fare well too. So we were a bit wary for quite a while as to what will happen when sovereignty transfer to Mauritius does happen. So we put that point forward many times. But when you balance the two between what the British government has done and is still doing for 50 years, and then when you have a new resolution, a new direction, a new opportunity, and within that opportunity, you have someone like Olivier, with very strong connection to the Mauritian government, and with his heart, which is his heart connected to the interest of the community. So we decided to take the chance as far as the Seychelles community is concerned, the Seychelles committee and the community in general. So, and the chance being that we will never have a solution from the British government. We will always be a lesser citizen, though we have a British passport. And with the new opportunity, we have the word from Olivier and from the decision makers in Mauritius also that the future will be different. We will have the opportunity for resettlement. There will be some compensation of some sort, some level paid. The Chagosians will be treated as equal citizens. Chagosians of Mauritian or Mauritian of Chagosian origin or whatever, however it is defined, but we will be treated as citizens. The terms of the offers of citizenship by the British government, whoever else who wants to remain British, and nothing will change on that front. So the people who are British, all the Chagosians who have taken the British citizenship will remain British citizens. And we have strong confirmation that the rest of us, all of us will also have the opportunity to get the Mauritian citizenship, which I actually have already started the process of getting my ID and my passport. And I will be a proud Mauritian citizen also, Chagosian of Mauritian of Chagosian origin. And what also encourages me is the Rodrigue. There is political structure precedence in Mauritius of an independent, semi-autonomous independent state existing within the Mauritian government. And they have significant level of control, administrative control over their own territory and their own politics and their own aspirations. So we hope that will be a model that in time we can walk through. And of course, that will be through a process of consensus and process of mutual agreement on mutual benefits. And of course, with this fundamental, the base of it being the benefit to the Chagosian community. for us, but especially for our generations come in the future generations. So we welcome this development, and we are very not hopeful. What's the term? We are very positive that our community here will welcome it well. Also, we hope that the process, the next immediate and medium term developments maintain that positive track, and that we open conversations with the decision makers also in Mauritius. So thank you very much. I think my time is just about off. And
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pierre. It is great indeed to have the voice directly from Seychelles for the Chagosians that live in Seychelles to also indicate what their take is in terms of the agreement that is on the table between the government of Mauritius and the government of the United Kingdom that says that Chagosians can return to the Chagos Islands under Mauritian sovereignty. Now, I also wanted to acknowledge, as I was going through the list, I see that the ambassador of Colombia in South Africa is here. Let me acknowledge here, Madam Ambassador Maria Mina Rojas. I've had the privilege, because my job at UNICEF International Relations includes international relations. I've had the privilege of working with the embassy of Colombia when they brought Afro descendants, Colombians of African descent who were here in South Africa last year, towards the end of 2024. And they were coming to speak to us at UNISA about COP19. It was a great honor for us to collaborate with the Embassy of Colombia on that point. And on that occasion, of course, the issue of the Chagos Islands came up because the question was, is there an opportunity for Colombians of African descent who live there? Are there communities internationally that they could connect with to join in the struggle? Because in some ways the struggles are the same, but of course also different. So I thought just to acknowledge the ambassador and all the other friends that are here. I really appreciate your participation. We then move, and just to summarize, and on the issue of Rodriguez, perhaps just to clarify to the other participants who are not too familiar with what Mr. Pierre Prosper is referring to. So Mauritius as a government, Mauritius is an island, but it also has the island of Rodriguez that is part of its territory that Mauritius has allowed to have what we could loosely term internal self-determination. So the people of Rodriguez, although Rodriguez is part of Mauritius, have a certain level of self-rule. And therefore, this has, amongst the Chagos community, become a topic to say, now that there is agreement between governments and states that Mauritius will have sovereignty over the Chagos Islands, when we return, what form of, what political system would we adopt for ourselves and governance system? And Rodriguez has been mentioned a few times as one example where the Chagosians could return to the Chagos Islands, which would be under sovereignty of Mauritius, but would have internal self-determination. When Olivier spoke earlier, also he made this point that internal self-determination on the Chagos Islands as Mauritian citizens. Thank you so much, Pierre. With then, ladies and gentlemen, I would love to hand over the mic to Professor David Vine, and a good friend of many years. When I first met him, I was myself a PhD student. I was introduced by a longtime lawyer of the Chagosians in England, Mr. Richard Gifford, and said, if you're interested in this topic, you might want to speak to David, because he has done a lot of, as an anthropologist, on-site research. And of course, he was a number of years quite ahead of me in the PhD journey. I was just beginning, and you might want to speak to him. And since that time, me, Olivia, and David have been to several conferences, presenting papers, speaking, etc., doing lobbying on behalf of the Chagosians. David, I welcome you. So beautiful to have you all the way from America. Professor Vine has worked for a number of years. He was a professor at the American University in Washington for 18 years and until 2024. And currently is a freelance academic who continues to advocate and lobby and for the Chagosians and write books, etc. Professor Vine, may I hand you the mic?
Thank you so much, Dr. Tong. Thank you, Maureen. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's wonderful, of course, to see Olivier and to be with Olivier and Pierre, as well as Prof. Zondi. Thank you also to Pamela Adams and Norma Zondo, Elisa Zulu, and all the people who made this event possible. I am particularly thrilled to be part of an event hosted by the University of KwaZulu-Natal, because I was lucky enough to attend the university and classes there for a semester during my university studies in 1995. I actually have still a folder from the university under its former name, and feel tremendously lucky to have had time to be there and to study in South Africa and to learn from South Africans. Indeed, many of my teachers are represented in this event, including South Africans and Chagosians alike. I really do, as sort of Maureen, you said earlier, want to pay tribute to the Republic of South Africa and to South Africans for your inspiration in leading your freedom struggle for decades, and for your role since independence in a variety of ways, but in supporting Chagosians and supporting other people struggling for their basic human rights, including Palestinians, of course. This is a complicated story. The story of the Chagosians and the Chagosian struggle is a complicated story. At the same time, it's a very simple one that I think a lot of people can relate to, and we're seeing this in some of the questions and the chat already. It's a story of stolen land. It's a story of a home stolen from the Chagosians, of a homeland stolen. And I think that's one that many people can relate to. And I'm happy to say, and as you've heard from Olivier and Pierre in particular, that Chagosians are closer than ever to finally winning some measure of justice. And now we have to finally ensure that they win justice. To that end, I want to emphasize really four things. And let me see if I can share my screen just to emphasize these things. I'll also make sure that I don't run over time. Hopefully you're seeing now my screen. Ignore the lies about the Chagos Islands. Wonderful. So the first thing, ignore the lies. If you've Googled Chagos Islands, you will see a lot of news that is so-called news, fake news. There has been a concerted right-wing campaign in the UK and the US since the deal that has been referred to, since it was announced in October. There's been a concerted effort and campaign to circulate a gift to China or perhaps to Russia or Iran. These are absolute lies, and smears that are rooted ultimately in fear-mongering, especially about China, as well as in xenophobia and anti-Asian racism. And they've circulated for far too long. Now, secondly, I want to emphasize that the two governments, the UK and the government of Mauritius, should sign an improved treaty for the Chagos Islands as soon as possible. The longer they wait, the more likely there is a chance that right-wing campaign would succeed to kill the deal. And I say this given what appears to be widespread Chagosian support for the deal, not universal, as Olivier and others have acknowledged. There are some Chagosians who have concerns, and we can understand why. But there is widespread Chagosian support for this deal. And the two governments should sign an improved Chagos Islands Treaty as soon as possible. And by improved, that is to correct the major problem in the originally announced deal, and that is that Chagosians were to be barred from returning to Diego Garcia. They could go back to all their other islands, but not Diego Garcia, where we know they could live side by side with the base. So two governments should sign an improved Chagos Islands Treaty that would allow them to go back to all their islands as they should be allowed. Third, Chagosians can and should be a model for resettlement, reparations, and human rights. Chagosians can be a model, and we need to support them in being that kind of a model. And I'll go into more detail about this, but this is exactly what we need at a time of horrific human rights abuses and crimes and indeed genocide. Fourth, and this is an important part of Chagosians being a model for reparations, return, and human rights. Chagosians must lead the return, resettlement, and reparations processes. They must lead those processes, and they must be the first to benefit from the return of sovereignty to the Mauritian government. They must be the first to benefit. Let me go into a little bit more detail about each of these, and of course, I'd be happy to go into even more detail in the Q&A and discussion that follows. I think I can stop sharing. So again, ignore the lies that somehow this Chagos Islands deal between the governments of Mauritius and the UK is a gift to China or anyone else. Again, there's a long history here, but after the deal was announced in October 2024, that the governments of Mauritius and the UK would sign a treaty to formally recognize Mauritian sovereignty and to allow Britain to continue to exercise sovereignty on Diego Garcia so that the US military base on Diego Garcia could continue to operate. This is the terms of the deal. The deal also announced a compensation package, a new compensation fund, and other support to benefit Chagosians. And as I mentioned, the deal announced that Chagosians would be able to return to all their islands except Diego Garcia, the major problem with the initially announced deal. Soon after this deal was announced, right-wing politicians like Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, US senators, including the now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, engaged in a concerted campaign to try to kill the deal. And that is, why did they do that? They did that to try to maintain British colonialism in the Indian Ocean and by extension in Africa, because Chagos Islands are part of Africa. They wanted to maintain ongoing British colonialism, and thus they tried to kill the deal by employing an array of disinformation, smears, and outright falsehoods, beginning with the idea that this was somehow a gift to China. This could not be further from the truth. This idea does not have any basis in fact. Let me just be crystal clear. No basis in reality. Baseless smear is how political scientist and Diego Garcia expert Peter Harris described the accusation that the deal is a gift to China. Baseless smear. Peter Harris says there's no evidence, none, zero, zilch, that Mauritius has any interest in hosting a Chinese base or that China has any interest in a Mauritian base. They're not allies or security partners or particularly close in any way other than a trade deal that most governments on earth have with China. It's a straight up smear, Harris told me in an email. It's hard to overstate how absurd this right-wing narrative is. Indeed, the deal was a sign of the deep alliance between the UK, Mauritius, and the US. It's really a kind of fairy tale, and it's particularly nonsensical because Mauritius's other closest ally is India, whose greatest enemy, of course, other than Pakistan, is China. Again, this is rooted in anti-China fear-mongering, xenophobia, anti-Asian racism, and it's shameless to try to support, maintain old school British colonialism in Chagos. I'm happy to say this fear-mongering campaign appears to have failed. The two governments did not sign a deal before the US elections, and they announced that they would allow newly elected President Trump to weigh in on the deal. Many thought that this would be the end of the deal because Trump is allied with many of the right-wing figures who were launching this campaign. Encouragingly, when Prime Minister Starmer visited Washington recently, President Trump said he is inclined to support the deal. So it looks now like the deal will go through. But again, it hasn't gone through yet. And that is why, to get to my second point, the two governments should sign an improved treaty as soon as possible. They should ignore the right-wing disinformation campaign and sign an improved treaty as soon as possible. Again, let me emphasize the improvement. Barring Chagosians from returning home to Diego Garcia would perpetuate their exile from that island and perpetuate decades of injustice. Returning to two of the major islands that they formerly occupied, Paros and Solomon, incredibly important. But to not be able to return to Diego Garcia would not be the same for people who were born in Diego Garcia, have ancestors buried in Diego Garcia. Let me also emphasize that continuing to bar Chagosians from going back to Diego Garcia, if the UK and, in a sense, Mauritian governments and US governments do this, it would violate the International Court of Justice's 2019 ruling and the UN General Assembly resolution of the same year that demand that the UK and other countries uphold Chagosians' full human rights and aid in their resettlement. It doesn't say aid in their resettlement to some of their islands, aid in their resettlement, full stop, which means all their islands. US and UK officials have long used quote unquote security concerns to justify banning Chagosians from Diego Garcia. These are absurd. Chagosians could live on the other half of Diego Garcia, which is not used by the military, just as civilians live near US bases worldwide, including in places like Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Third, Chagosians can be a model, as I mentioned before. They can be a model for return, for reparations, and for human rights standards globally. This means wherever Chagosians live, they must have first the right to return and resettle in their homeland, the right to resettle as indeed all their islands, including Diego Garcia, the right to receive full, proper reparations from all the governments that committed human rights against Chagosians. It means they must have the right to full reparations, which means compensation, but also other forms of repair, including healthcare, psychological, and other forms of therapy, education, training, and other rehabilitation services. And Chagosians must receive and have the right to additional compensation if somehow they are barred from returning to Diego Garcia. They should essentially receive rent if that continues, and we very much have to ensure that the barring Chagosians from Diego Garcia does not continue. But if somehow it did, they would be due additional compensation for any time they're continue to be prevented from returning to Diego Garcia. Let me just, before coming to my last point, emphasize that, of course, reparations, as important as they are, and they are critical, no amount of money or other forms of repair could ever completely make up for the injustices and crimes that have been committed against Chagosians. My last point, fourth, Chagosians must lead and Chagosians must benefit. To be a model for the right of return, for resettlement, for reparations, and for human rights, Chagosians, as victims of human rights violations, must decide, they must be the ones who decide what reparations and repair look like, and they must guide the return and reparations process in line with international human rights and reparations standards. The worst and most painful irony would be if, after all these years of struggle, more than half a century of struggle, Chagosians finally win the right to return home, and then others benefit from that return. For example, powerful businesses, wealthy individuals, or perhaps even the Mauritian government, that they would be the ones to take control of Chagos and benefit economically and otherwise from the return of Chagos to Mauritian control. Therefore, Chagosians must have the right to make policy and direct the resettlement process in Chagos, to be the first to resettle the islands, and to benefit from resettlement. They must have the right to direct the announced trust fund and other support or any other compensation and reparations package. They must have the right to a regional House of Representatives, like the one that Maureen mentioned earlier, as the one sees in Rodrigue, the part of Mauritius that has a degree of self-autonomy. And they must have, as Pierre mentioned, Chagosians wherever they live, any Chagosians who do not have Mauritian citizenship must have the right to fast-track Mauritian citizenship and passports to ensure that they can return. That's my alarm to alert me to shut up, which I will do in just a moment. Chagosians must have the right to fast-track Mauritian citizenship and passports so that they can return to Chagos and receive any repair and reparations package that other Chagosians can receive. This means that the UK, Mauritian, and US governments must include Chagosians in a meaningful way in any remaining negotiations to finalize the Chagos Islands Treaty, and that the Mauritian government must ensure Chagosians direct the resettlement and reparations planning and process. As victims of a major human rights abuse, what is really a crime against humanity, as Human Rights Watch and others have said, Chagosians, not governments, not other outsiders like me, must guide what return, resettlement, and reparations look like to ensure that Chagosians, before anyone else, benefit from the return to Chagos. Thank you. Maureen, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. Thanks, David. I was saying that your intervention, as they like to say in these international meetings, takes us, one step further. We've heard from Olivia. We've heard from Pierre Prosper about the importance of their right to return and why it is so important to Chagosians to be allowed as a people to return to their territory. We've heard about, the approaches to the government of Seychelles. We've heard about the support by the government of Mauritius from Olivia to the process. And of course, Professor Zondi has taken us through the African Union treaties over the years. Now, Professor Vine takes it further to talk about the reparations model. Of course, it's giving us a 4 major point: ignore the line, sign the treaty, must be improved as soon as possible. And, Chagosian can be a model for settlement, reparations, and human rights standards, and the right of the Chagosians to lead the reparations and resettlement process. And he goes further to name quite a number of areas in terms of which the Chagosians should be allowed to take the lead on the issue of health, housing, including mental health, rehabilitation, passports, but most importantly, the Chagosians should be the one who decide, the resettlement process and what happens to it, and what should happen in that regard. Therefore, bringing the voice of the Chagosian central to the conversation, because until now, that's what's been lacking. Until now, we've had a situation where several governments discuss, enter into agreement, decide the fate of the Chagosians without the voice of the Chagosians. And that's why, and I think as South Africans, this is what we understand, because even in our own country, before democracy, the African National Congress had to go and lobby internationally, go into the process of international solidarity, lobby several governments to say, we're a government in waiting, we shall be in charge in future. However, for now, because we do not have the voice, we need for you to support us on this journey. So Chagos is there for South Africans, and this is my plea, are saying that this is their struggle. However, they could use friends who understand what it means, what they are going through, and can become a voice in supporting their process of return and reparations. We've covered and we've gained a bit of time, ladies and gentlemen, because our next speaker has not been able to do it. Dr. Esme has not been able to do it, to make it today, to participate. So we've gained a bit of time, and that allows us to have questions, more time for questions and answers. And Pamela, you are here with team, and I would seek your assistance in this Q&A session. If there are questions to any of the panelists here today, or general questions that I may have missed in the Q&A, I would love for us to read them. Perhaps, Pamela, could you assist in that regard to read some of the questions that have come through? It's not easy for me to scroll backwards and forwards here and follow some of the conversation. While she looks for the questions that are typed, yeah, could we indeed have people ask direct questions either to Olivier Banco, to Professor Zondi, to Pierre Prosper, and to Professor Bai? This is our opportunity to ask them questions.
Thank you, Dr. Tong. Just in the Q&A chat box, there is a question from Mr. Mashlangu. What is the roles of the Seychelles and Mauritius governments in this matter? Ultimately, international relations cannot exist without peace. The US and UK should be joined by all the concerned parties to finally resolve this painful matter.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that question. Let's start with Pierre, because Pierre, you have started to talk about, the support received previously and currently by the government in Mauritius. Let's start with you and then go to Olivia. Thank you. Thanks, Pamela.
Thank you for the question. The Seychelles government, historically and currently, have maintained a position of support towards the Mauritian sovereignty claim. They voted in the African Union on behalf on support of Mauritius, and I think they still maintain the same policy until now. As far as the community is concerned, and we've had historically support from the government, and we've had a lot of conversations with the current administration, and we're waiting and hopeful as to how they can help us with regards to the community is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Pierre, do you want to go back on that point about citizenship that you touched on earlier, but you didn't manage to go into detail? The implications for citizenship.
Yeah. In our last Zoom call with an FCDO, which is the foreign ministry in UK, minister, and with regards to British citizenships that is currently offered to everyone, and those that have and those that can still apply for, that process will remain. So everyone will remain British citizens, and when sovereignty does happen, the transfer does happen. With regards to the Mauritian citizenship, I have affirmations from Olivier, from lawyers in Mauritius, and conversations with our own immigration office in Seychelles, that should not be an issue on all Chagosians who are not of Mauritian citizens right now to acquire. It's an automatic acquisition of the Mauritian citizenship. Being born on the Chagos Islands. I'm actually going through that process as a test case on myself right now, and I've already have some exchange with the immigration office in Mauritius. But we hope going forward that there's no procedural or issues with regards to all of the persons wherever they are. And yes, okay.
To Olivia, thanks, Pierre. Then we give the opportunity to Olivia. What is the role of the governments in this whole matter?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say that there is no problem for Mauritian government to allow to give Mauritian citizenship to all Sagosian because, as you may know, all the records of civil status office are now in Mauritius, and that had been done even for those born between 1965 up to 1973. I myself have been involved with the head of the civil status office to find out all these documents which had been hidden for many years. To just have all this, we have in all 273 birth certificate, marriage certificate, and death certificate, which had now been very easy to found in Mauritius. And I get a meeting with the Attorney General in Mauritius and raise this issue on the demand of my brother Pierre Prosper and all those concerned in Seychelles. It's clearly said that, of course, as David Dalvine said, it will be a very fast track for Sagosian who, even they have 2 or 3 other nationalities, they will be allowed to have Mauritian nationality and they will be treated as every Sagosian. This is the main, and I can say, as Pierre said, we have a very strong exchange between the two governments, Seychelles government and Mauritian government. Pierre had mentioned that Seychelles had support Mauritius, form part of African Union, and always keep to support what had been done with Sagosian. They condemn it and just find a way. And that means that we are all working together. And of course, I totally agree with all the points that have been raised by Professor David Bay.
Thank you so much. Thank you to you both. Another question that came through that was typed in: do the people of the Chagos Island agree to the continued presence of the U.S. military base on Diego Garcia? Because as we have seen, even the current agreement says that between the British government and Mauritius says that Chagosians, when they return, they can return to all the outlying islands, including Peros Banos and others, but excluding Diego Garcia, where the military base is concerned. The question proceeds: have they, Chagosians, participated in the agreement between Britain and America and with regards to the continued presence of the U.S. military base on their land? Olivia, do you want to go first? What is your take about Diego Garcia and the fact that no one should return there, and whether the military base must continue there?
I will be frank with you. You know, it's a very big pity to see that Sagosian born on Diego Garcia will not allow to go to resettle in Diego Garcia. But we're still supporting that because we put forward all the important points that all over the world where we have a U.S. military base, we have cohabitation. I just mentioned about one of the best, well-known secret base of America outside the United States, is Guantanamo. In Guantanamo, we have people. It's the only place that we do not have local people. It's in Diego Garcia. We say that it is impossible. We should have to correct. This is why allowing people to work on Diego Garcia, we think that priority should be given to Sagosian. Of course, if we have permission to work on Diego Garcia, we will be obliged to live on Diego Garcia. This is the point that we put forward. We are not terrorists, but we are not supporting. Our action has been very clear, Professor, and all those who are listening to us, is our point is based on the non-violence, because we are not supporting war. But what to do? Instead of having nothing, why not just taking? But we should not forget that in the past, they used to deport people from Diego Garcia to St. Peros Banos and Solomon. And 1 year after, what happened to Diego Garcia happened on Peros Banos and Solomon. And it was not difficult for Sagosian born in Diego Garcia to come and live in Perros Bandas. Instead of having nothing, what to do? If there is any choice for us to choose another side instead of that deal, of course, it will be pleased for us. But we have the only choice. And if we refuse to accept that, the UK government will come to say, you know, I'm just engaged to make this happen for a settlement. Don't forget a professor and all people who are listening to us. The UK always put forward that they will never waste British taxpayers' money to make it practical to let Sago Ocean to return. Now, if they decided to join with Mauritius to make it possible on Perros, Banos, and Salmon, why not?
Thank you, Olivier. Indeed, and for many years, this has been the argument. Why are you denying Chagosians to coexist with a military base? When in the case of Cuba, the people of Cuba have been allowed for many years to coexist with a military base on Guantanamo Bay. So we have heard Olivier's point that why not allow Chagosians to live and work on Diego Garcia, because this is also their territory. And that is his view. Let's take, I don't know if David has a view of Professor Zondi. No, but actually the question is to Chagosians themselves. Do they agree? Let's take Pierre. Pierre, your take on the military base. You are muted, Olivier. Pierre.
Yeah, I just realized that. Okay, it's a very, it's how they say that, the elephant in the room type thing. And this whole situation started because of the base and the eviction. And now we are in a position as to, to decide whether we give away Diego Garcia and not say anything about it. And I take Olivier's position also. And there are many people in Seychelles where my brother was born on Diego Garcia. And I think, throughout the world and with Cuba and Guantanamo Bay, example being put forward, the local population has existed with the military base. These people are normal people. We are normal people. We're just asking for normal things. And we have a history of, as Olivier said, non-violence, but just normal people wanting to be where they belong. And there are a lot of people, most people were born on Diego Garcia, I think. And it should be absolutely okay and reasonable to ask that there should be some level of settlement in Diego Garcia also.
Thank you for that point. As we move on to the next question, and it's from Tana. Tana says, why are we tying the issue of the people of the Chagos Islands, their right to self-determination and their right to return to the sovereignty of Mauritius? She's saying, why are we combining the two? Why can't the people of the Chagos Island as a people exercise their own right to self-determination without the imposition of Mauritius sovereignty? That's just her point. That why are the two being linked? They don't have to necessarily be linked. Let me take Professor Zondi, because Prof, you spoke at length about the AU position on this matter from a decolonization perspective. What is your take? We are aware of the several resolutions that the African Union has taken on this, firmly supporting Mauritius' claim to the territory of the Chagos Islands as a matter of decolonization, as a process of completing decolonization. May we hear your view on this, Professor Zondi?
No. Thank you very much. Of course, I do respond in writing to some of this. The participant who raises the issue about the fact that the ICJ opinion lumps together the question of Chagos and the sovereignty and decolonization of Mauritius may create a new injustice, because it's still the questions of sovereignty and decolonization are about people as much as they may be about state, but they're about a particular people. In this particular case, the Chagosians. One of the blind spots of the African Union is it being tied to national sovereignty, and therefore seeing itself as representing nation states rather than in representing nations. And as a result, they tend to be statist in their approach to questions, sometimes very big questions of justice, sometimes very correct approach to things, save for the fact that they tie it to state. In this particular case, Mauritius is seen as the personality representing Chagosians without verifying that. And that the state of Mauritius itself does project itself as representing the sole and the legitimate representation of the question of the Chagos. It's not very clear how the Mauritians, the Africans, and others engage directly with the Chagosians themselves, because we know where they are. They have representative bodies. You know where they were exiled to, because they were exiled, and all of those kinds of things. They can be easily engaged in a very simple process. But it seems to me that it's paradigms, it's a colonial paradigm that continues to block us from seeing them for who they are. Therefore, the victory with the ICJ advisory opinion is only just one in a long process of freedom, of the fight for freedom that the Chagosians still have to go. It's not over now. It's not over because they still have to insist on their right to determine their own destiny, just as all of us, all the nations of the continent, have that right and have exercised that right quite often. It will be important that we handle that case. So that's a point of campaign, that's a point for pushing, of lobbying, that's a point of debate and counsel and advice to governments that we need to remember. The Chagosians' right to determine their destiny must be protected by all means.
Thank you so much, Prof. Professor Vine.
I think Professor Zondi covered it quite nicely, but I think yes, first and foremost, Chagosians' rights as a people must be protected. The challenges of the international legal system and the International Court of Justice is really what led Chagosians to ally with the government of Mauritius in taking the case to the International Court of Justice. And I think, well, Olivier and Pierre could talk more about any desire for self-determination, but I think the model of Rodrigues, as you mentioned, Maureen, in which Chagosians could have some degree of autonomy within the Mauritian state, seems like a very useful one that they clearly have an interest in pursuing. And that would include a regional government, and that would allow them to control and determine the laws related to land rights and the economy and the political control over the islands, or local political control at least.
Thank you so much. I don't know if Olivia wants to add, but from my part would be about an understanding that and David has started to talk about that as well. You know, the international system, it's really a system of governments. The United Nations is a club of governments, if I could put it like that. That's what the United Nations is. And so is the African Union. It's a union of states, and these are member states. That's why the language used would be member states. So those vehicles are really meant as avenues where states and governments put forward, decisions, discussions, and eventually the agreements that they form come to be termed as, the basis of international law, because simply put, is the law that governs states. Hence, therefore, all the processes that have come from the African Union and from the UN would be process driven by states. And that's why even the ICJ, International Court of Justice, judgment is one concerning the state of Mauritius and the state of the United Kingdom. But we also know from at least South Africa and Namibian experience is that what then tends to happen is that people that are still under colonial rule, eventually find observer status in these international bodies. And that's how the African National Congress in South Africa, for example, eventually, was able to lead us to democracy. Have observer status at these UN bodies, African Union bodies, and be able to put forth and say, as a people, this is what we want. Because South Africa at the time was not, well, we say sometimes that it was a colonization of a special type, because and therefore the fight of the majority citizens in South Africa, the African majority, was a fight, quite frankly, for self-determination. And that happened within a state that was not under any external power, for example. So there are all these permutations that exist, international law, in the international system of justice and human rights that allow for peoples to exercise their rights and to become a free people. Olivia, I don't know if you want to add anything on this point. He's raising his hand, yes.
Yeah, it's okay. I would like to share something. The decision, it was about the sovereignty between Mauritius and UK. As you know, the UK always want to deal with that on a bilateral stand. But Mauritius had bring the issue in the United Nations General Assembly, and the matter had been by a vote where Mauritius got 94 votes against only 15 to UK. The matter had been referred to the ICJ. In the ICJ, all the countries have the right to support by a written statement or by oral statement. Mauritius and UK got more times to explain why the sovereignty should be there. And we should not forget the decision of the UK, starting by saying that they are deeply regret what happened to Sagoshan. They recognize what they did with Sagoshan. And we should not forget also that decision on the 25th of February 2019 was not taken by any Sagoshan. Was taken by 14 judges. Only one was against, but 13 judges said that the ICJ have the prerogative to give his judgment, his advisory opinion on that matter. Now, how could we protest that? But we should not forget also, as Maureen said, we as Sagoshan, we have tried, as I mentioned, to find a way to go to the United Nations to fight for our people. But we have been pulled out to say that we should be a state. It's only we got this opportunity with Mauritius to do that. And we should not forget, those who are supporting the UK, I respect that choice. Should not forget that the UK government have 14 dependents overseas territories. We have St. Helena, we have Pitcairn, we have Falkland, where all those islands, we are talking about racism, they are all have their budget. They are all have their possibility to have national health services, to have everything, except Sagoshan. Why the reason? Because we are African origin. How could we accept that? And I have to share with you, the only budget that the UK spent on Chagos, on BIUT, is only to charter a patrol vessel to look around Diego Garcia, and even that, Perros Banos and Salomon, even that we have illegal fishing. How long will we continue to let our right vanish instead of giving this opportunity? There is not a matter of looking out. Mauritius is giving us this opportunity. Mauritius is recognized our right to return. And of course, we are based on the autonomy, like Rodriguez, to have our own parliament, to have our own mini parliament and the Mauritian government. Instead of that, what choice we have? What choice? And Mauritius accept to just find out because Mauritius is the only place. If when we uprooted people from Chagos, everyone should know, should have bring to UK. We should have never known Mauritius. But unfortunately, we should not forget that we have been dubbed in Mauritius. We have been dubbed in Seychelles. How could we forget? I myself, like me, like other people who live in Mauritius for more than 50 years. I get married with a Mauritian. I have my children born in Mauritius. How could I ignore their identity? How could I ignore that? We should be frank on that. You see, there is no problem about Mauritius because there is consultation and there is a well communicated between Sagosian and a Mauritian government, and we bring together not only Sagosian in Mauritius, we have Sagosian in Seychelles, we have Sagosian in UK. They all have the same right to join, except those who want to continue to be under British control. Okay, but all those who support that, just come. There is enough place for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. And just to add David's point about the Chagosian voice will have to be at the center of all these conversations. And those of us, Professor Zondi, myself, David, who are academics and are interested for various reasons on this topic, can only offer what we think. But in the end, it is for Chagosians themselves to decide, but also to be central. This is, I think, the strongest point that Professor Vine has brought to say in areas of policy, who benefits, how do they benefit from resettlement, the form of government, the treaty being signed, all this socioeconomic, rights being respected on the Chagos Islands would have to be central on this question and how we move forward. One question, before I go to the detailed question, one question was asked about, are there comparative studies on reparations and how, what could be looked at as a possibility for the Chagosians? The short answer is yes. The people of the Marshall Islands, and David knows, because he's invited us to participate at a seminar at the American University of Washington. And I think, Olivia was there as well, where we heard from the lawyer of the people of the Marshall Islands, who gave us, a very detailed, explanation about how, where the people of the Marshall Islands had been removed as part of, nuclear test bombs on their land and had suffered massive economic, environmental and health, damages, and how the court in that regard quantified, the reparations due and payable to them, etc. So the short answer is yes. There are several case studies that can be looked at on how you look at reparations for people that have been wronged by governments and harmed by government programs like nuclear testing. In the case of Chagosians, the harm comes from their denial to live on their own territory for purposes of continuing a military base on their land. There's a longish one from Mr. I hope I say your name properly, Hussein Vauda. It says, Dear Chair, and esteemed speakers and Ms. Zondo and Pamela, thank you for organizing and hosting this webinar. The presentations are thought-provoking and calls for reflection. May I raise a few points of interest? It is to be noted that South Africa is the only country globally that has an official Human Rights Day. However, our brothers are murdered and women raped daily in countries like Sudan, DRC, Rwanda, Mali, Darfur, Mozambique, and Ethiopia, where their own kind is mercilessly killed, etc., as it was in the days of slavery. As South Africans, we know that very recently we suffered human losses in the DRC. 14 South Africans were killed by the M23 rebels. And South Africa is only in that territory as part of the peacekeeping force of the African Union. And that's how they came to harm, and that's how they died. So Mr. Bauder says, what can we as a people of African descent do to create a safe environment for our brothers and sisters? And he invites answers from the panel. Anyone who wants to go? Perhaps Professor Zondi?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think what the discussion reminds us is that the process of fighting for freedom and liberation and reparation is a long process. Nelson Mandela spoke about his experience using the metaphor of a long road to freedom. And then he says, after climbing on one hill and celebrating that, you suddenly realize that there's more hills to climb. And I guess that is true also for the people of Chagos. And the ICJ outcomes, the response of the African Union to it is a major victory. But it is a victory that prepares them for the next phase that is required. And I guess the message is that you don't rest on the laurels, you don't celebrate too much on this, you need to move to the next phase. This process is never going to be complete without guaranteeing the people of the Chagos their right to determine their destiny and decide how they will be governed, where, by whom. And they may also decide on the specific role of Mauritius in their government. It is something that is absolutely critical. It's in line with the UN Charter. It's in line with the principles of historical justice that the Chagosians, in the end, nothing should be done for them, on them, about them, without them. And I hope we'll keep making that message going forward, that let's hear the voices of the Chagosian people. And then somebody was saying it's the question of reparations. It's an important one because they've suffered harm, they've suffered loss, yet some people made gains on the basis of the stolen property, which was their island. So there needs to be a concerted effort, at least to put up a fund. That will be a development fund that will be used by the Chagosian people to run their affairs, including the fund from which they can draw in order to go present to the United Nations about what they think should happen, to go around the world and establish their case, as well as to address the social difficulties and needs that they have, including fighting poverty, including fighting marginalization, which they suffer quite significantly. So while the status of the issue has changed, the status of the people themselves has not changed yet. So the struggle continues. A luta continua. Thank you.
Continua indeed. Thanks, Prof. One last question, I think we can squeeze it in, that I saw is the one about, is anyone collecting artifacts, culture, music, food, etc., about Chagosians to ensure that this is preserved? I know that in Mauritius, at least, the Chagosians do a lot of preservation of Chagosian music. Olivia's own mother and relatives have been keenly interested in ensuring that Chagosian music, food, and culture is preserved. And in fact, the Chagosian offices in Mauritius, it's really a place where a Chagosian would feel as if it was possible they were in the Chagos Islands. It's probably the only time when they actually hear Chagosian Creole spoken widely by the elders. And where Chagosian music can be heard, etc. But Olivia, do you want to speak about the preservation of culture, music, food, etc., and what do Chagosians do to ensure that into posterity this culture, music, etc., is not lost of the Chagosians?
Maureen, I can share with you that we are very concerned about our culture and tradition. We work for it. It's not only about our claim to be returned back and to have a compensation. It's also concerning about our culture. What we did, we always promote culture, such as our traditional meal, our music, and our dance, and also concerning Sagosian culture. We just make it as something very important for us. And I'm very proud to say that we have been participating with Professor African to prepare something to go to the intangible in UNESCO. And I can say to you that since 2019, UNESCO had recognized Sagosian music as a world heritage, which is it's a very an honor for our Sagosian. Let me share with you. We even give this opportunity to our young generation. Not later than next week, I'm just leading a group of 16 young Sagosian performing in Rio Island, one of the French colony, to just share the culture of their grandparents and parents. And it's an honor. And I'm so thankful to Professor Laura Jeffrey of Edinburgh University, who had helped us by promoting the Sagosian culture. We have our music who had been recorded, which had been now postcard everywhere. We have even the national plane, Mauritius company, who just gives this opportunity to let our music known by others. And we have been working not only on the traditional food, not only on music, not only on dance, but also concerning medicinal plants, which we often use in Chagos. It is something very proud for us that we have been able to achieve that, and we want to just give this opportunity. As you said about our accent, it's something very special for us, because the Creole we speak, we have different accent, but day by day it's been disappeared, because we still have Sagosian from Chagos, whose Creole was very different from others accent. You see, it's something that we try to make everything to safeguard and to keep it alive.
Thank you so much. And I don't know how we can write this into the general chat. I think it was from David, the Chagos Online link where people can log in and see the preservation of Chagosian culture. That is, and the efforts that have been taken in that regard. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now 4 o'clock. I think we've had a really fruitful conversation and discussion. The program says for 10 minutes, I should have some concluding remarks, and then we do the vote of thanks. From my part, I'd like to thank again every single one of you who made time to be with us today. And I do hope that you'll continue to be interested on this topic and you'll continue to participate in various platforms and opportunities to raise the Chagos question in whichever area or opportunity or platform that you have available, to keep talking about the right of Chagosians to return home, to have self-determination, to receive reparations, but of course also what form of reparations they should be able to get. Prof. Zonke has talked about the development fund that needs to be put in place. And I can only summarize to say, indeed, it is a long walk to freedom. The journey has just begun. We do have the agreement, but a lot more needs to happen. And what we can do as South Africans and others in other parts of the world, and I saw there's a participant from the African Bar Association who's also here from Nigeria. I welcome you, Madam, and thank you for your participation as well. I had shared the link widely, and I see that she also participates here. And if I may say, my comrades from UDW, University of Durban-Westville, which is now the University of KwaZulu-Natal, we do have something that we can, as former activists and student activists, that we've been involved in, and can continue to create opportunities and platforms. The University of KwaZulu-Natal, of course, will continue to create that platform for that to happen. So the concluding remarks are that it's a long walk to freedom. The journey has just begun. And let's continue to support Chagosians. Let's continue to be available for those of us who are able to do research, continue to do so in support of the Chagosian cause. And yes, I'm very pleased to say that the University of KwaZulu-Natal, under the very capable hands of Madam Noma Zondo, the executive director, and she's just come up, has a keen interest. And maybe let me just revert to you at this point to add any words of conclusion today.
Thank you, Dr. Tong. Thank you so much for such an insightful discussion this afternoon. And I see there's a lot of interest in the topic. And I think UKZN is committed to stay, engaging and also arranging such discussions that will enrich our understanding of these issues. But I do have Xoliswa, who's going to do the vote of thanks at the end. And thanks again for such an amazing job that you did for facilitating this webinar. And thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Let me bring in Mayor Xoliswa Zulu.
Thank you, Dr. Tong. My job is quite simple this afternoon. I'd like to extend our heartfelt thanks as the University of KwaZulu-Natal to our wonderful facilitator and speakers. Your insightful contributions today have truly enriched our understanding of the complex issues surrounding social justice, the right to return, and the ongoing struggles for human rights, both in the context of the Chagos Islands and the broader global landscape. Your expertise, passion, and dedication to this vital topic have left us all deeply inspired and motivated to take action. A special thank you goes to the audience. Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. The discussions and reflections that have taken place here today will undoubtedly fuel further conversations and advocacy for change. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge the behind-the-scenes work of the team. Thank you, Pam, for planning, coordinating, and ensuring the success of today's event, and to Kurt from our ICS team for ensuring the technical aspects ran smoothly without any issues. Thank you once again to everyone for your participation and support. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Indeed, I saw that Kibisaletse has raised her hand, but Kibisaletse, we are closing now. And unless it's so urgent, I'm not sure at what point you raised your hand. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, I think this brings us to the end of today's proceedings. Thank you, and thank you. And thank you.
Chairperson,
Yes.
is it possible for everybody to turn on their cameras? So that
Yes,
we can take a
I love that. Yes, for those still present, is it possible to turn on the cameras to register our digital participation by, I go by those who know me know I like saying, unless they support it did not happen.
I know Pamela is shy. I know she thinks she's not a panelist, but because she appears on the screen, it should just be a name. It's better that she turns on her camera too.
And
Thank
Pam,
you.
can you put this on the
Yes.
different view so that we can see everyone in one screen?
Yes, indeed, please.
Since you are the
Guru.
host.
Thank you.
Kurt, are you online?
Is Kurt here?
Let's see,
Who's
probably-
taken over the hosting?
I don't see.
Oh, yeah, because then it will, we needed to change the viewing to gallery so that
But
everyone,
Pamela is switched off again.
maybe she's trying to check if she can change the
I've
view.
managed to do it on my side. I can try and take a picture.
I'm trying on my
okay.
side.
Okay.
Take a picture.
And there's a point where we say Chagos.
Okay.
Chagos.
All right.
So
I
our
can
smiles and
We've done it.
let
Alicia?
me know. Can
Finish.
everybody just smile again, and then I'll do a quick one again.
yeah,
Okay.
Chagos.
Chagos.
All done.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks
Everyone.
indeed.
Thanks, everyone.
Till
Enjoy
next
your
invitation,
day.
we shall be here.
Yes,
Thank you,
absolutely.
everyone.
Thank
And thank you to
you.
give us this opportunity. Rest assured that we are back in the future of our generation, our people.
Absolutely.
You're most
Absolutely.
welcome.
Keep fighting.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone,
Okay.
for the opportunity.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Dr. Tong. And we will be in touch, and I will forward the recording links to all the panelists.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Really appreciate
Thank you
it.
again. Sure.
Thanks. No, I was saying to Norma, you and Tim you're spot on. I mean, effortless. I didn't need to be worried about today at all while I was busy with so many things. I knew it would be, and it was a great success. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for the kind
you.
words. This
Pleasure.
is much
Okay.
appreciated. And we will
Yeah,
see you again. We'll be in touch. It will be nice
Absolutely.
to do a follow-up sometime later, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Certainly November, 3 November is National Chagos Day. That's one option.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
So
3 November is National Chagos Day. So we can also find other opportunities so we could have a webinar again. Perhaps
not a
earlier.
problem. And all the Q&As which we've done will be on the spreadsheet. So I will extract that and I'll send it. And maybe some of these can be addressed along the way.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect.
As I
And take
leave,
care and God bless.
and you too stay blessed.
Thank you.